Ukrainians have demonstrated much greater capability on the battlefield over the past several months, and that certainly has impressed President Trump. Whether they're winning the war is another more difficult and complicated question to answer, but certainly they're doing better. And what that means, I think, from the White House standpoint, is that it no longer makes any sense to ask the Ukrainians to cede territory to Russia that Russia hasn't seized by military force.
Well, President Trump also met President Zelensky today, who said that Ukraine's efforts on diplomacy have been reinvigorated after his hour-long talks with the US president. The White House peace envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are reportedly planning to make their first visits to Kyiv soon. Let's talk to Thomas Graham. He's a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and author of Getting Russia Right. Good evening to you, Thomas.
Good evening.
Let me ask you about that news, the suggestion that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, President Trump's peace envoys, the main negotiators, are apparently planning to make their first visits to Kyiv. How significant would that be?
Well, that would be very significant. Steve Witkoff has spent a lot of time with President Putin in Moscow over the past year, and that has gained him a reputation for repeating Kremlin talking points. He really does need to visit Kiev to understand that, or to give at least show that he understands the situation on the ground, has a sense of where the Ukrainians are, and that it can bring those ideas to the negotiating table in further conversations with the Russians. So this is an important development if it in fact takes place.
Yeah, I mean, since that very high-profile meeting between President Trump and President Putin, it appears that essentially the whole US involvement in any kind of diplomatic negotiations basically ground to halt. Why do you think it might have been revived now?
Well, I think it's being revived now, in part because the situation is, one, more dangerous. We have seen an escalatory cycle play itself out in the war over the past several months, increasing Ukrainian deep strikes against Russia, intensified missile attacks by Russia against Ukraine, for example. But at the same time, this conflict is also ripe for resolution. It's clear that the Ukrainians would like to end this conflict as quickly as possible. They have manpower problems. The war continues to devastate its economy. Reconstruction is going to cost billions of dollars. From the Russian side, they are paying a very heavy price in men and material for almost no gains on the battlefield. They are not investing in their future, and every day this conflict continues, Russia falls farther behind other great powers, particularly China and Russia, in the years ahead. So we have a risk of escalation, a possibility of moving this towards a resolution. This is exactly the moment when the United States needs to re-engage in diplomacy, and the need to be able to do this in an intensive fashion.
We have seen Ukraine increasingly taking the attack to the Russians, those attacks on energy installations inside Russia, the drone attacks on Moscow and other cities and so on. There is this suggestion, isn't there, that President Trump likes a winner. He's seeing that the Ukrainians seem to be the ones that are gaining the upper hand, at least, and that perhaps that is why he's now giving the Ukrainians at least this greater opportunity to use the American Patriot missiles.
Well, I mean, certainly there's something to that. The Ukrainians have demonstrated much greater capability on the battlefield over the past several months, and that certainly has impressed President Trump. Whether they're winning the war is another more difficult and complicated question to answer, but certainly they're doing better. And what that means, I think, from the White House standpoint, is that it no longer makes any sense to ask the Ukrainians to cede territory to Russia that Russia hasn't seized by military force. Let's sit down, negotiate. There's more of a evenness on the two sides, and this I think is an important driver behind the decision to re-engage.
Uh, Although, of course, there's no direct military assistance still here from the United States. But, I mean, the key thing does seem to be that the personal chemistry, the personal relationship between President Zelensky and President Trump appears to be so much better now than, of course, that disastrous moment in the White House where Zelensky was publicly berated.
There's no comparison. This is night and day. We've seen President Trump's attitude change radically over the past several months. And I do believe that is in many ways connected with the greater success that Ukraine is demonstrating on the battlefield.
You've written a book called Getting Russia Right. We've talked about how President Putin is now finding that there are increasing costs to the war in terms of a terrible loss of lives and casualties on the Russian side, plus, of course, the damage to the energy infrastructure and so on. How, though, do you think he is going to view this? Is there any chance that this could lead to him actually being prepared to try to seek a diplomatic way out, an end to the war?
Well, the political context in Moscow is changing, and he is under greater pressure to consider a way to end this conflict. Certainly, he's going to declare victory under any circumstances. But what the United States needs to do now, as I said, is to engage in intensive negotiation, to test in private how far Putin is willing to go in order to reach a resolution of this conflict. It's certainly in his interest to end it sooner as opposed to later, but how much flexibility he has, how willing he will be to make concessions is something that can only be tested in a real diplomatic process that is by and large confidential, not out in the public glare.
Just finally, though, do you think the fact that you have now got these two key Trump envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, heading to Kyiv, that could perhaps be the start of a renewed process there?
Almost certainly. If they go to Kiev, they are going to go to Moscow. The real challenge is to continue the process. You can't solve this in one or two trips. It's an iterative process. It's going to have to play itself out over several months, I would think. And so the president, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner are going to have to be intensely engaged to move this process forward.
Thomas Graham, Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, author of Getting Russia Right. Really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.